we would here take an in-depth look at how research in societies is conducted, how social science research is conducted. Because there are very many steps and types of social science research. So this course is termed as the kind of research paradigms. So now you've heard a new word. What is a paradigm then? Paradigm is something deeply associated with research, social science research as well as natural science research. But now we are concerned with social science research. So we have a set of beliefs, motives, and outcomes which we expect from social science research. These outcomes kind of direct the kind of paradigm that we come from. So paradigms, when they are crystallized together, definitionally we can say these are the kinds of motives or the kinds of knowledge which derive and also dictate the kind of research that we are doing. So hence, we have two major kinds of paradigms in social science research. Both have two very diverse ways in approaching social science research. The first one is the positivistic paradigm. The positivistic paradigm is inspired by the Enlightenment period in social history. As you know, that in the 18th century, Europe had a lot of turmoil. Now, what was the result of this social turmoil is the discipline of sociology. Along with sociology, you have had also many other disciplines like psychology and economics, which were inspired and influenced by the social turmoil. In the French Revolution, which took place in the 18th century, created a massive disturbance in not only French society but also European society. From there, we have an eminent scholar and philosopher coming up who is also known as the father of sociology, Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte was determined that the kind of terror and the kind of revolution that we had in French society in the 18th century should not repeat itself in future generations. Herein lies the beginnings of social science research, and herein we start defining what a paradigm actually is and is meant. So, Auguste Comte decided that let us create a science of society. Now, what would be this purpose of the science of society? It would look at previous failures in society and also try to come up with resolutions to that. How can we resolve turmoil and issues in society, which helps us in the future as a kind of a guidebook, if you will, to control the different kinds of turmoil that may arise in society. So herein starts a very scientific approach. What do we mean by scientific approach? That we have a cause and effect kind of a logic. Now, before the Enlightenment, the kind of society that we used to live in believed in blind faith. Any kind of abstract or something called metaphysical, something which is superstitious or cannot be seen with one's eyes or can be heard with one's ears, was believed. So any kind of knowledge that was passed on by the monarchy in different countries, or even the church for that matter, was believed without any question. Later on, as society progressed towards a revolution in the form of the French Revolution, we have this tendency to provide evidence in terms of creating any kind of social facts. So, you will not start to believe anything and everything that is told to you until or unless you also see the kind of evidence that is behind it. This is what was inspired from the natural sciences. As you know, the natural sciences, namely biology, chemistry, physics, mathematics, are inspired by a logical relationship. You have a cause which has effects on the overall society as well as human ecology. Now, sociology and other social sciences started to use this same kind of a cause and effect relationship. Auguste Comte came up with this logic that if we look at the causes for social turmoil, it would help us control the effects. Herein we have the inspiration behind the very first paradigm, or the kind of knowledge that governs social research, the positivistic paradigm. So, what is the aim and objective of the positivistic paradigm? The positivistic paradigm tries to reduce social issues on the basis of a cause and effect relationship, and thereby also study large scale information on the said issue. Now, how can you study 500 people's experiences on a particular issue such as, say, unemployment? You cannot. It is not possible humanely. But if you reduce it to a set of numbers which tell you how unemployment, say, is affecting these people, what are the ways in which they are being affected, what are the types of unemployment, say, which exist, and how it is affecting other factors in society. Numbers help us reduce and also create an impact on the social issue at hand. And the positivistic paradigm utilizes the very numbers to actually explain to us social phenomenon. With Comte, then we also have a follow-up from a group of philosophers called the Vienna Circle. Now, these philosophers in the Vienna Circle countered Comte and explained to us that you cannot always reduce things to numbers. You also have to verify them, you also have to validate them. So the Vienna Circle then added another layer to positivistic philosophy of social science. The Vienna Circle now said that instead of constantly trying to prove something, let us disprove something. So now they started using things such as variables, which are two different components affecting a social phenomenon. Now, in order to understand how they are affecting the social phenomena, you establish the cause and effect relationship between them. With the progress of the positivistic philosophy also came a lot of criticisms, and herein you have a counter group of philosophers who are saying that we cannot reduce human experiences to numbers. Then you are not only objectifying them or using them as objects of information, but you are also dehumanizing the difference in human experiences. If you recall the previous module that we discussed, where we said that humans are all different creatures having different experiences. So herein, again, this group of philosophers came up with a different school of thought in terms of a paradigm, which is known as the interpretivist paradigm. This was based on Max Weber's idea of something called Verstehen. Verstehen talks about experience. It's a German word explaining empathy and experience. At this point, let us look at another quiz question. How many major paradigms are there? Is it 2 or 5 or 6 or 3? Now getting back to Weber. Max Weber was a German philosopher. His idea about society was that even though individuals exist in a group or community, but their personal experiences are different from each other. The collective outcome might come as a singular effect, right? It might be seen as something which is similar to everyone, but all humans are different. So in order to understand human behavior in kinds of social research, we have to treat them also differently. We have to treat each humans with empathy. We have to try and understand the motivations which drive each and every human beings. So let us now look at the types of positivistic research. The first is a survey, and the second is an experiment. Let us deal with the second one first, because that seems a little bit more complicated than the first. The reasons you will get to know gradually as we discuss them. So, an experiment is usually a tool utilized in the natural sciences. You must have gone to physics labs or chemistry labs or even biology labs where you have experiments done in controlled settings. What do I mean by controlled settings? That the temperature, the atmosphere, and the kind of tools that are used in terms of the experiment have been controlled by the researchers. So, in order to deal with human beings, this becomes kind of problematic for obvious reasons. Again, going back to the previous module and connecting with that, where we said that humans are different creatures, so our behaviors are different, and the kind of environment in which we are born and raised and act are all different. So, it is very difficult to have a control setting. How will you control human emotion? How will you control the kind of natural or the kind of physical conditions in which human behavior keeps on changing? Even if you are able to do that, then how would you bring up with the outcomes of the research? It becomes quite challenging. Yet that does not mean that experimentation is not done. Experiments also involve a very strong ethical aspect, that you would have to follow a very strong set of moral regulations. You will not manipulate the participants who are participating in the experiment. You will be taking care and precaution for their benefit, and the experimentation for which the social research is being done will not harm the participants. Of course, if the subjects are harmed or the participants are harmed, then we are not going to benefit in any way from the social research. Hence, most experimentations in quantitative research are done under very strict control settings. And there is also a margin of error which is taken into account given the difference in human behavior. So then let us move on to the first kind of quantitative research that we talked about, sample surveys. Surveys are usually conducted for large scale data. What do I mean by large scale? It doesn't comprise of only 10 people or 50 people. It comprises of hundreds and thousands of people even at a stretch. So these surveys then talk about certain trends in societal behavior. And by utilizing surveys, we are again using numbers to tell us and guide us that how is social phenomena governing us as human beings. Thus, a survey would be conducted using something called a questionnaire, where you would have certain set of questions which the participants answer. Then as the participants answer, you then utilize those answers and responses in order to understand and analyze what is their behavior and experience towards a certain social phenomena. At the time, a very interesting survey is being done by the Cambridge University, whereby they're trying to check out a 4-day work week. So all the participants who are part of this survey research are being given a 4-day work week. And at the end of this research, it would be seen that how does this 4-day work week affect their productivity? Are they happier? Do they become more efficient? Do they get closer deadlines? All of these can be mapped. And then that can be utilized to influence social policy and law. From surveys, we move on to look at certain drawbacks of quantitative research or positivistic research. Certainly, large-scale data which is collected by quantitative research or through numbers would not be able to express everyone's experiences. It becomes quite inhumane because you are not looking at the emotions or the kind of external factors like class, race, religion, ethnicity, which might influence our experiences with regard to a social phenomena. which is what the interpretivist paradigm, if you recall, tries to talk about. So, surveys, even though they give us very solid information, can also be questioned and criticized. Is that the appropriate way that we want to go with regard to a particular social phenomena? Are the types of surveys like telephonic surveys or postal surveys good enough to substantiate any kind of social phenomena on a large scale basis even? There might be ethical issues whereby experiments cannot be controlled and external factors affect our decisions and participation in experiments. We might drop out of experiments, and we do not have to give any kind of reason when we drop out of experiments. The data can also have a very strong researcher's bias. What do I mean by researcher's bias? A very central kind of a bias which researchers are not able to overcome and understand. They also are different human beings. So then, let us look at interpretivist paradigm and how it helps us to understand and bridge the gap that quantitative research paradigm or positivistic research paradigm is not being able to fulfill. But before that, let us look at another quiz. What are the types of positivistic research? Is it ethnography and interview? Is it survey and experiments? Is it content analysis and archival research, or is it none of the above? Now let us move on to the interpretivist paradigm. As we have discussed previously, that Max Weber, who was kind of like the founder father of the interpretivist paradigm, or was the main inspiration behind the interpretivist paradigm, is asking us to look at human behavior with empathy. Each individual behaves in different ways because they come from a set of different motives, behaviors, patterns, even geographical locations. This is where our folkways, mores, and traditions kind of influence us. So, we need a very in-depth kind of an attachment as a researcher. So, what Max Weber and the interpretivist paradigm suggest is that we look at research on human beings from a very close point of view. So, there are two main ways in which we can conduct qualitative research or interpretivist research, as we can say. The first is an ethnography or an observation, and the second is in-depth interviewing. Now we will deal again with the second one first, in-depth interviewing. We've all heard of interviewing, but what is this in-depth interviewing? An in-depth interview helps the researcher create a rapport with the participant. So, then you are able to understand and relate to the researcher as a participant and also have a human touch to the interaction. When your expressions are being reduced to numbers, your personal experience and your personal touch is moving away from those numbers. But interpretivist paradigm tries to retain that personal touch. So when you are doing an in-depth interviewing, you are also, as a researcher, sharing your experiences, and the participant is feeling comfortable just having a casual interaction. But as a researcher, we are also ethically bound to protect all of that information from of the participants. Why? Because that is very private information. So we maintain and protect their anonymity so that their identity is not reflected outside, and we also protect the information that they have shared with us. We maintain the confidentiality of the discussion. In-depth interviews help us gather a wide range of experiences, and hence from all of that data we can utilize the one that is required for our research. Now let us move to ethnography. Ethnography might be a new term that you've heard, but simply put, it is a kind of observation. not only do you observe a particular society or a particular phenomena or particular human behavior, but you also can become a part of that observation. That is what we call participant observation, when you are also being a participant in that society and observing the way of their lives, thereby gathering very in-depth and very rich information about how a particular phenomena is carried out. So many researchers in terms of anthropology have utilized ethnography to write about a particular society. The most renowned one of this is Malinowski and his research on the Trobriand Islanders, where he lived with the Trobriand Islanders for a few years, going about their way of life. The Trobriand Islands are somewhere in the Pacific, and they were indigenous peoples whose lives have been documented by Malinowski. From their daily rituals to their religion to their way of life in terms of economy to their marriage rituals, everything can be written in a detailed account. And in general, ethnography is used to find out information about something which is unknown or less known to society. Hence, this research of Malinowski's is validated over here as a kind of ethnographic research. So the researcher also has to put in an effort to stay with the community to gather information. Now, as interesting and as participatory as both these types of qualitative research might sound, there are a lot of drawbacks which have been heavily criticized by other philosophers of different schools of research. First is where the researcher can have a very strong bias. What do I mean by a researcher's bias? The researcher is going to put forth their assumptions when they are sharing information in order to create rapport. There is always the ethical imperative whereby you can misuse very personal data. And as researchers, we always have to be careful of the kind of technology, the kind of data that we are collecting, and protecting and maintaining these ethics in research. We cannot leak or share information that is private of our participants. That may harm and endanger their lives. Even though there have been very heavy criticisms against qualitative research paradigms, yet they are very widely used and they are very common, and often social science research uses qualitative paradigms more than quantitative paradigms to share and create new forms of knowledge. Now, there has been another school of thought which you should be knowing in passing, which is known as the critical social school of thought. The critical social school of thought tried to challenge both positivistic paradigm and interpretivist paradigm, thereby saying that both your research paradigms are flawed and we need to understand each and every marginalized community as well. You only talk from a position of power or privilege of the mainstream people. That is the extent to which we will be talking about critical social school. Now let us look at another quiz. What are the main qualitative research types? Again, you have 4 options. Is it ethnography and interviews? Is it surveys and sampling? Is it discourse analysis and content analysis, or is it none of the above? Now, because we are doing a paper on media, we would of course be looking at the different kinds of research types media uses. Media is a little distinct from the rest of society and the other disciplines within social sciences. It uses technical as well as a lot of informative knowledge in order to express to us how public opinion or human behavior is formed. So the different kinds of media research that we will be looking at are content analysis, discourse analysis, rhetorical analysis, and archival research. Now, each sound are quite similar to the other, but they are very distinct from each other. Now, let us look at content analysis in the very beginning. Content, as you might be very familiar with that term in the present times, is all forms of knowledge. Now, this content in terms of media research might be written content in the form of newspapers, pamphlets, scripts, even, and documents. But it can also be videos, films, documentaries. So, what are we talking then in terms of content? Any kind of analysis or any kind of in depth understanding of how this content influences public behavior or human behavior is what media research types, as specifically, is what content analysis usually follows. Content analysis looks at the exact writings in terms of written content, or the videos or documentaries or any kind of sound for that matter in terms of audiovisual content. These content are then analyzed from different philosophical points of view to understand how it affects our decision making and behavior. The next kind of media research technique that we would be talking about is discourse analysis. Discourse analysis is a little distinct from content analysis in the sense that it looks at a wide variety of things. Now, it does not only look at written content or audiovisual content per se, but it also looks at the direction in which all those content have gone. What are the kinds of knowledge which have fed into that discourse or have fed into that body of content? So, discourse analysis gives us a very macro aspect of how human behavior is shaped and formed. From discourse analysis, we look at archival research. Archives are something where we store historical data. Now, archives primarily are physical archives where governments and different organizations have records of previous laws or any kind of documents or any kind of historical information, be it museums or be it documental archives which different governmental organizations possess. Data about different kinds of societies which governments or non-governmental organizations as well possess and store. They preserve this data. That is where archives come from. Archival research now has also taken a very different form in the source of digital archives, where you have a lot of internet bodies and a lot of different kinds of digital information given the kind of technological life that we now lead. So all this information can be important for any kind of research that I am conducting. If it is about a certain time period, then I would be using this archival documents or archival content in order to further my research, in order to also validate the kind of impact it might have on humans. Hence, archival research becomes very important, and the preservation of archives also become very important. In terms of media studies, archival research holds a very important position. So let us now come to the last two kinds of media research forms. Social role analysis is a very interesting and important kind of media research. What do I mean by social role? Social roles are the kind of roles that we play in society, which are defined by our age, our ethnicity, our nationality. These factors, which we call stratifiers, which divide us in hierarchies in society. Now, how does media use these social roles? Media tries to understand our behavior in relation to these social roles that we have. Our social roles influence our decision making, and media tries to understand how and what is the connection between social roles and our decision making. It can also use them to understand public acceptance of certain forms of art. Now, finally, we look at rhetorical analysis. Rhetorical analysis is very interesting and unique in its sense. Rhetorical analysis uses a metaphor. What do I mean by metaphors here? It can be an adaptation of a screenplay or a literature. It can be the adaptation of a kind of art form, say a music or a text in literature, which is adapted by the media in order to create a new form of content. So, at the same time, we are using a metaphor to express opinions or express social phenomena. That is very interesting, given it is difficult to accept things quite brutally at times. So, hence, we use metaphors so that the public is able to understand through these metaphors the kind of issues which are central and relevant in social research. I hope you all had a very enriching experience over this module. Thank you for your participation.